Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hi, this is Nick Anastasiou, story editor on Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Bad Batch. And you are listening to Aggressive Negotiations.
Hello and welcome to Aggressive Negotiations, and I am just one of your hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and so excited. I feel like, the palace is just so much cleaner now that there's not slug juice everywhere, and with me, as he is always, the one and only Jedi Master, John Mills.
Well, there may be no slug juice in that you can see in the palace, but completely unrelated, I promise. Did you enjoy your soup this afternoon?
I did not have the soup, thankfully.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, next time then. Next time we'll get you.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Well, of course, you could find us all over the place. In fact, we would love if you would follow us at the Jedi Masters over on Twitter. Your entire network under @JoinNerdParty, on Facebook at facebook.com/The Nerd Party. And of course, you can find thenerdparty.com online where you can see all of the shows we're doing. You can go over to the contact section if you'd like to send us an email. And of course, you could find us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're on Spotify and you're listening to us, please give us a star rating there on the app. You can now do that, and we would really appreciate that. But John, so the Book of Boba Fett has started.
Uh-oh.
And something that we have seen in the Book of Boba Fett recently is this idea of modding. And modding one's body, adding cybernetic parts. And so I was really fascinated with this because I felt like this is such a good extrapolation from the things that we have seen in Star Wars. And to start this off, it really reminded me of what Grievous does. Grievous, we know, was an alien who specifically modded his body because he thought it would make him a better warrior. And to me, this is what we see people doing in the Book of Boba Fett because they want these enhancements, these things that they think are going to make them better versions of themselves.
Yes. I like the Grievous connection that you're going with there. I would also go with, because I know that there's been chatter online where people are ambivalent about it. They don't quite know where to go with it. But we have Lobot, I think, as our North Star.
Ooh, yeah.
Where Lobot's obviously modded. There's some history in the comic books, but we're sticking to screen only here. So we have a long history in Star Wars of people who have modified bodies. And Grievous, I think you're absolutely right, is the best example of it. Because the way that they approached it in the Clone Wars series, he saw himself as improving himself, as shedding his weak mortal form, as it were, and becoming something more, something that would live longer, something that would be tougher. And in terms of the modding with the people on Tatooine, what I want to throw out there with you, I like where you've gone there. But what I would ask is, do you think that it's an expression of people who know they're never going to go beyond where they are, and so they are going beyond their limited surroundings in the way that they know how, which is enhancing themselves because they cannot enhance their surroundings and go somewhere else. So it's sort of like a person who lives in a small house but buys a really fancy car. Somebody that lived in our neck of the woods did that. And I remember asking my dad one time, well, why don't they just build a bigger house? Because that car is so nice. And he said, because that's just how they enhance their lives. That, we have a house that's a little bit larger than theirs, and we have cars that are a little bit more modest. They have a smaller house, they have a nicer car. And so, what do you think about that? Like that it makes sense for it to be on Tatooine because these people feel trapped by their surroundings. They're enhancing themselves.
That's a great question, because I feel like that gets really deep into the idea of, you know, these people seem to have it pretty good with life. There's nothing crazy going on. And, you know, even though they're on Tatooine, you know, there's nothing about their lives that doesn't seem to be well cared for, or, you know, they're not suffering for credits. It doesn't seem like, because they're spending all this money on making themselves better. And, you know, it's that hierarchy of order kind of thing. And once all of the basics are taken care of, we start to worry about other things. And it does really seem like, now that I think about it, it feels like something where we could kind of see this in our own culture, where people have it so good that they're now just focusing on these very esoteric and very interesting ideas that are taking them all over the place, because it's almost as if, like, they're bored. And so they just need something to, like, take up time and, like, to make themselves feel better about that boredom.
I think there's credence to that. I definitely think there's credence to that. I would go a step further, and I would say that it's not necessarily bored, and they're obviously they live on what amounts to a backwater, and you're either a criminal or you're not. And I wonder if these people that we've encountered that are doing these mods, in addition to, you know, I can't escape Tatooine, so I'll escape my reality by, you know, modifying my body. And there's an interesting reaction, I think, to this that is inculcated in all of us, where we look at it and we say, oh gosh, she replaced part of her arm with a robot arm. He enhanced his eyes with robot stuff. He put this robot thing on him. He has a robot arm. But are these enhancements all that different from implants or Botox or all of those sorts of things? It's an expression of the desire to individualize and perfect, or see your body as perfect as you wish it to be. You know, do you think that our reaction to it is simply because we can see it as a mechanical thing, as opposed to a lot of the enhancements we do now are subdermal?
I do think that is a really great pull. And I think that makes a lot of sense. That there is always this desire as beings to make ourselves better, you know, physically, mentally, spiritually, all of those things. And physicality is a big part of that, you know, and I think, you know, we do look at our own world, you know, obviously we can see the ways in which people will spend thousands of dollars to make themselves look and feel better. And a lot of those things too, they'll pay those thousands of dollars because they don't want to take the time and the effort to do what they need to do to actually make those changes gradually and more healthily. And this just takes that to a whole nother level, because we're now modding ourselves technologically in a way that our bodies were never even meant to do. And, you know, what's interesting is that's not necessarily so far off the mark for where we are now, you know, and so it gives us an interesting idea of maybe where we could go. But again, to me, it all comes down to the idea of, this is exactly what Grievous wanted, right? He didn't think he was good enough as he was. He was never going to be a good enough warrior, and so therefore he needed these modifications to make him the greatest warrior he could possibly be. And you know, those two things are that is such an interesting idea of what we would do to ourselves and why we would do it.
You mentioned Grievous again, and again, I like where you go with that. But I don't know if Grievous is really our true indicator here, because what I wonder, and the thing is, I have a lot of thoughts going from the last little bit where you were talking. But one thing I want to go on, because this is who we are, I think, and this is the Star Wars galaxy as was set up by Lucas, about spirituality and the need to believe. Is the presence of these mod people an expression, in a sense, of they're so rooted in the material, they don't see anything to believe in aside from their bodies? Grievous is, to your point, a great expression of that. The body itself, the physical self, is all that there is. And therefore, I'm going to make it as perfect as possible, as opposed to the more spiritual approach of, it doesn't matter if my body is perfect. What matters is that my spirit, my soul, my essence, my katra, my kata, my whatever word you want to give it, that needs to be perfect, as opposed to my body needs to be perfect. So is it possible that what we're seeing with these modded people, is it possible we're seeing Boba Fett as the reintroduction of believing in something greater to their lives? They only see, before Boba Fett hires them, the belief in the material, in the now, in the physical. But he has obviously moved on to something where he's gone past that and he believes in something higher. Not necessarily a god or the Force or anything like that, but he believes in a higher calling. Is this possibly a thing that helps frame Boba Fett as a believer of sorts, who is going to take that faith to the people around him?
That is a great question, and I think one that I hadn't thought of, but when we do see of where the character is, where he's come away from his experiences, in the Sarlacc pit, as from being a bounty hunter, to his experiences with the Tuskens, that he wants to be a part of a family. Like, he wants to make the galaxy even a better place for people like him by making smarter decisions, by not just using people. There is something bigger that he is looking towards. And part of that is a much more, I think, respectful view of the people around him, right? And I think that's one of the beauties of what we see with him and the Tuskens and everything. We see this whole relationship begin, and most uncanny thing that happens, like you would never expect it. But again, it becomes this respect for people beyond just what I guess they can do for you, and wanting to take care of people in a way that goes beyond just, like you said, the kind of the physical nature, it seems like. So I do think that is a good way of looking at things. And I think what is interesting about this is that, there is a whole other side to this, which is it's not about necessarily trying to make yourselves better, but it is that these type of things can be used for medical purposes to keep people alive who wouldn't normally be able to be alive without these type of medical interventions. So obviously Vader, very much a part of that discussion, as well as then what we see that happens to Fennec Shand. And, I think it's interesting you have those two characters and their new life that they're given. They both make very different choices as to what they want to do. Shand obviously chooses to stick with Boba Fett and become somebody who's slightly more altruistic than she used to be in her life. And of course, Vader makes the decision to go full-on villain with his the changes. And what I think makes this is where I really come down to this. It's like it's not the modifications themselves and or the life-saving equipment that's evil. It's a tool, and it is what you do with it that makes it good or bad. And I think that's really, really interesting.
Maybe it speaks to just this pervasive human belief that there is a separation between the body and the spirit, that the spirit can be something of its own and the body is not integrated with it. which, of course, I don't want to dig into that one because there's a specific theological question about that, about the integration of the body and the spirit, that I know where I fall on a very specific argument with that. I know where other people fall on an argument with that, so I'm not trying to go down that rabbit hole necessarily. But I think that what's also fun is we're analyzing this to a very deep level, I think. But is it just possible these are just kids making bad decisions, in a sense? Let me explain here, right? Because somebody would say, maybe when they hear me use the word bad, well, who am I to judge, what they're doing? But this is obviously an uncommon thing to do, even on Tatooine. We don't see a ton of people walking around with these modifications, these outside modifications, where they're flaunting their false forearm or their fake, because they of course you can then peel it apart and have the whole discussion about, well, what about somebody who loses their arm? Luke loses his hand. Anakin, before he turns to Vader, well, when he's on the edge of Vader, loses his arm. But it doesn't mean he's evil that he replaces it, sort of thing, obviously. But is it just that these kids, because everyone we've seen is very young, are making decisions that aren't looking toward the future? Because we have people who are older than they are that haven't made that decision. Is it possible we're seeing this as this is a youthful decision, and there are maybe future consequences that we haven't seen? Like maybe when you do a mod, there's a need to continually update it that traps you in a cycle, which is hinted at with Grievous in the Clone Wars.
I think that you've really hit on something that's really interesting, and I think maybe this is the creators of the show's, maybe commentary about the idea of that the younger generation is so technologically addicted. And therefore, that's the reason why you see it being younger people, the ones that are really into this in the show, because it mimics our own world. And the people who are older that have this, it's more of a necessity for life other than just this, like you said, almost addiction, to where the technology is so much a part of them that it literally is a part of them now. And they literally can't live without it because they've made it a part of their person, their body. Like their body functions with this technology in it. And in many ways, I think about the ways in which we have our technology with our cell phones and all that kind of stuff, and the younger generation that I see that just can't get their nose out of this glowing screen, and I find myself sometimes not being able to do that as well, and I think that's an interesting commentary there.
Okay, look, the games are extremely good on that little glowing screen. I mean, it's more like the Star Trek episode that where Wesley gets addicted to the game, right?
Yeah.
One last avenue I want to sort of like push through here, though, is, and this stays in the spiritual versus physical realm, is we know of the Bomar monks, which are the brains floating in spider bodies, which for me is hell, but for them apparently is bliss. Is it possible we see them going on a path toward that this is an expression of what happens eventually when you have a technological society that is indistinguishable, where the physical is indistinguishable from the robotic, where it is inevitable that these people and these situations are going to happen, because once you have the technology available, well, all that matters is that my brain stays intact so that I think the thoughts that I think. So it doesn't matter if my brain is floating in a formaldehyde bulbous jar on the bottom of a robot spider. Again, hell for me. It simply doesn't matter what body I have because my mind is my mind.
It's interesting because I think with Star Wars specifically, the technology is always just a tool, and it's never meant to be more than that. And I think that's definitely Lucasian worldview. These things are just meant to be tools. They're not meant to be a part of ourselves and or take away from our natural senses, right? And on our more connected reality to things outside of us that we can only truly sense with what we've been given, what we've been born with, and that when we begin to take away parts of ourselves and add technology to that we make ourselves less than human. And that also takes away from our connection to things beyond ourselves, spiritually, mentally, physically. All of that is being lost, and I think that's at least the Lucasian version of that. It's going to be interesting to me to see kind of where Star Wars goes and if they've thought that deeply about these things. I'm positive Dave Filoni has, but, he's not the only person creating Star Wars now, and neither is George, and because George is retired. So it's like, I don't know where we're going to go. And I don't really know if we have an answer to that question fully right now, because there was an answer, I think, for as long as George was there. But now I think that answer may be different in a few years. And I don't know if I'll agree with it as much as I agreed with the way that, and the way in which George went with things. Because I personally would just fall more in line with that, honestly.
It's weird because of the fact that what really resonates with Star Wars in the context of this seems very much to be what has always informed it, in a sense. It seems to fit naturally into it as I understand the larger philosophy of everything. But that's a very interesting point, that we could be entering into territory that wasn't really... I mean, honestly, I think there's probably a field where somebody could get a useless college degree where looking at Star Wars shows how we've gone sociologically, because it's always been a reflection of our evolving belief system and syncretism, as it were, as a global or American society.
Right.
So,
Well, and I think one of the things is, we've kind of made this point many a times in the 6 years that we've been doing this show, is the fact that when George started Star Wars, technology was very different.
Oh, yeah. No, very, very,
now.
very much. Yeah. I mean, when Lucas started everything, it was, it very much reflects that mechanical engineering sensibility. And then the computer revolution happens while Star Wars is being made.
Yep.
And it completely changes our understanding of our relationship to technology.
Yep.
And so, in a sense, I wonder if there is a comfort in these questions even being raised, because I know that from my perspective, I'm more comfortable with treating technology as something outside myself, as something that I will not integrate to myself.
Yeah.
But to your point, there are people, and as evidenced by the gang that Boba Fett takes into his employ, who technology is them. It is a part of them. And so maybe it's not like I was suggesting earlier, where Boba Fett becomes an apostle or an evangelist,
Sure.
if you will, of a certain belief system that is different than theirs, but rather it's more a reflection of the fact that Boba Fett comes from an older tradition that
Right.
just, the two traditions can respect each other, but they are completely different from each other.
Right. Well, and again, there's this difference too of like the idea of making it a part of oneself because of the necessity of life. Right. You wouldn't be living if this wasn't available, and neither of us is saying that that's wrong. People having artificial organs type of thing when that really becomes a possibility, or people have artificial hips and knees and stuff like that these days. All that kind of stuff. So. I mean, none of that I think is what we're talking about. So I do think, though, it does make for a very interesting philosophical and resonant question, and even more so now because technology is a part of our lives in a way that it was never a part of our lives when Star Wars first came out. And so I think, us seeing what we do in the what we are seeing now in the Book of Boba Fett really is kind of helping us look at things through the lens of more where we are now. And so I'm going to be very interested to see if we actually take that and really do anything with it, or if that's more just window dressing.
Star Wars is a place that's supposed to be about embracing and analyzing the deepest things. And so I hope they do lean into, these philosophical things, or at least give that opportunity for us to come in and have the discussion. So yeah, wow. This is really interesting because I think this is one of those things that ameliorates some of the criticisms I might have about Book of Boba Fett. We're sitting here having this discussion about what might very well have been just a neat idea somebody put out there. Hey, let's have a gang that they have cybernetic implants, and it's going to be a way for us to explain how he fixes Fennec Shand. But it's really interesting just to be in that space again of Star Wars. The Mandalorian did it, and now Book of Boba Fett is doing it, where simply something that could have been a toss-away idea that somebody had opens up those interesting philosophical discussions that leave us like Neo in Matrix Reloaded, which is a bad movie, but has an interesting scene where they have a discussion about technology and can we really live without it, or can we not, sort of thing. The machine and the person, how integrated are they? Again, Matrix Reloaded, not good, but interesting scenes in it. But speaking of keeping that conversation going, Matt, where can people find you out there in the wilderness of the technology that neither one of us can let go of, the internet?
Well, if you want to find me on any of those places, you'll want to search for the name Matt Rushing02. So whether that's Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd of Arrow, any of those type of places, you'll look for that name. You can also find me here on the network with a finished show I did with Drea Kaufman, where we talked about each and every chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. You can also find me over on the TFM network as we talk about so many different things there. One, the 602 Club, you will find my main show where I'm talking about all of the fandoms we love, not just one. There's a couple of great bonus shows in there as well. You'll find that I do with John. One is called Snyder Cuts, where we talked about everything Zack Snyder's done, as well as Assembling Avengers, as we walk through every single MCU movie. You'll also find me over there doing 3 other shows. One is called The Orb, Warp 5, and Literary Checks. The Orb is about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Warp 5 is about a Star Trek Enterprise, and Literary Checks about the books and the comics of Star Trek. But, John, I know people are just raring to catch up with you. Where can they find you?
People are not raring to catch up with me, Matt. That's a lie. But if they want to, they can find me as Kessel Junkie, KESSELJUNKIE. I'm out there. You can find me if you want to. Right here on the network, I am also co-hosting a show called House Lights, where we look at the work of directors, either from beginning to finish of their careers or current state of their careers, to decades of their careers, to selected highlights, what have you. I co-host that with Tristan Riddell and Darren Moser. It's a lot of fun. And like Matt said, you can find me as a part of Assembling Avengers, Snyder Cuts, and occupying what we call the Norm Chair at the 602 Club over there on TFM. But, honestly, after all of this discussion, I think I need to get a mechanical liver. So I'm going to go make an appointment. And so for now, Master Rushing, I think that it's time to close negotiations.
John, negotiations are closed.